1, which is square root functions. These right here are square root functions where you have an x inside of the radical symbol. So the first type that they do is where we're talking about speed. And the standard function rule for speed is just y equals 8 times the square root of x. So if you look at page 700, where it's talking about evaluating speed functions, they'll just have you do something like this along these lines when you have that the speed is, when the speed is 50. So if the speed is 50, x equals 50, you plug it into that same equation for the square root, 8 times the square root of 50. You would solve this first and then multiply by 8. When you do that, you'd get about 56.6 by multiplying it out, and that is your speed. So it depends on what measurements they're using. In this case, what they used was feet per second. So you're just evaluating when x equals that value that they give you, plugging it into y equals 8 times the square root of x. Okay, the next thing that we're going to be doing with these square root functions is they're going to ask you to find the domain. All that means is if you're given an equation of something like this, as an example, you're going to make the square root, whatever is inside the square root, which is at x plus 1, you're going to make that value, x plus 1, greater than or equal to 0. So I'd solve it, and x is going to be greater than or equal to 0. So let's go ahead and do another one like that. If I have a function y equals 3 times the square root of x minus 2, again, I'm just going to take whatever's inside of the square root symbol and make that greater than or equal to 0. Solve for x, and that is my domain. My domain in this case, just kidding, I did that wrong. 0 plus 2 is 2. So my domain would be x is greater than or equal to 2, whatever that value of x is. So let's try one more. If I have y equals the square root of 2x minus 1, I'm going to make that 2x minus 1 greater than or equal to 0. I solve for x, and I get 2x is greater than or equal to 1, divide by 2. X is greater than or equal to 1/2. That is my domain. So I've solved for the domain. Okay, if I have something like this, now I'm going to be asked to graph a square root function. I'm going to look at the 2x is greater than or equal to 0. X is going to be greater than or equal to 0. So that is my given domain. That is going to help me know where I'm going to graph. In this case, I don't have graph paper, so I do know that I'm going to look at that upper right-hand quadrant because of this right here. My x is greater than or equal to 0. So now I can create a graph of symbols. If I know I can put in 0, and if I put in 0, I'm going to have the square root of 0 plus 3 is 3. And then I'm going to choose things that are going to help me create a perfect square right here. So if I put 2 in there, then I'm saying the square root of 4 plus 3, which is 2 plus 3, and that's 5. I can then I can even put 4.5, because if I put 4.5 in as x, I'm going to have the square root of 9 plus 3, which is 6. So then I can create my graphs here. And again, I don't have graph paper on this screen, so I can go up to that y-intercept right there. And this is just like with an y equals mx plus b, so a linear graph or a quadratic. When you have just plus something at the end, that is your y-intercept. So once I've done that, I can then do 2, 5. That's going to go up there. And then 4.5 to 6, that's going to go up there. And when I do a square root function, it's going to look like where x squared looks like this. It's going to be half of a parabola just going up and over, just up and over. Let's go ahead and try another one like this. So if I have y equals x minus 4, I know my domain. I'm going to make that x minus 4 greater than or equal to 0. So I know my x has to be greater than or equal to 4. So when I create this graph over here, my first one right there is going to be at 4. I know that's the farthest left that I'm going to go. So I can create my chart. If I plug 4 in, it's going to be the square root of 0, which is 0. If I put in a 5, then I'll have the square root of 1, which is 1. Again, I want to create something in this radical that is going to be a perfect square. So my next option would be to get 4 within that square root symbol. So if I put in 8 as my x, then I have the square root of 4, which is 2. And I could also do 13, which would give me the square root of 9, which is 3. So I want to create values of x that would give me a perfect square within this radical symbol. Once I do that, I now have 3 points. I'm going to go ahead and make some more lines for x here and create some values for y. If I go over to 8, I go up 2, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and I'd go up 3. And again, that's going to give me half of a parabola. So that is what our square root functions are going to look like. Okay, hopefully you have gotten a couple of examples. If you have questions, ask. Your homework for this assignment is going to be 11.1, numbers 2 through 28 even, and then the spiral standards, which is on page 704. So this starts on page 702, and this is on page 704. Good luck. Talk to you soon.